evening. It's always the most difficult part to chair the last session because difficult to keep the crowd together. But I am lucky I've got the two of the most prolific speakers on my panel today. So it will be very rude on my part to actually introduce Professor Vivekanandan to the National Law School or people sitting here or the intellectual property world. But anyway, that's where I am supposed to do as a formal thing.
You can give an edited version.
So Professor Vivekanandan, having done his PhD from intellectual property law, is right now a faculty in this place, and his interest is in cyber law and the intellectual property law, runs courses, runs around places to conduct that courses. He's told me 7 places in a year, and so that made me rethink that it will be difficult if one gets associated with it. So both the speakers, the topic right now is the litigation in the standard essential patents for the FRAND world. As I talked about in the morning, that this is one of the most litigated subject matters. And this is one litigation, like besides these, the one is a practicing entrepreneur, other is a faculty. So from the policy perspective, what I can say is, if this is not solved the right way, this can make or break Make in India, or all we talk about electronic manufacturing or bringing electronic manufacturing to this country. Because how it is important is that if electronic manufacturing does not come to India, our export bill for electronic imports will be $400 billion by 2020, which will be 1.25 times that of the oil import bill. So that is one aspect which is very important to understand, that no matter how important it is to bring manufacturing to this country. And second is the whole lot of technology innovation is lying in this field. So how do we handle this? How will the future go? So first let's see a professor.
Sarkar will start.
Okay. So let's hear the entrepreneur, and to mellow down the subject, professor will be speaking.
Also will have the last word.
Will have the last word, as Sarkar said, because teacher has to have it.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are in the last session. I'm going to talk a little bit about, what is FRAND and why is it important? What's difficult? What are the challenges? And why? What's the importance? Now, when you talk about FRAND, you need to mention a few things many of it has been discussed from the morning. I may touch upon some of those points a bit, but a few points may appear a little repetitive. First, to start with, why standards? Okay, the definition of standards have been there from morning. It's a set of technical specification that seeks to provide a common design for products or process. It's like an interpreter. Its function is like an interpreter. Okay? If I speak Marathi and you speak Telugu, we can't talk to each other. So we need something, so that we can communicate. Standards to a large extent does that kind of job. And the purpose is interoperability is necessary in an environment, primarily for the ICT industry. My examples right now will be mostly for the telecom. That's where India has been largely hit. And the bodies in India are, they are struggling to come out with something which could be a permanent solution. And that involves both the producers, the users, and the government. Remember, standardization is consensual, Ex ante means achieving interoperability. There are a lot of IP issues which has cropped up. We'll look into a few of them. The main different type of standards which are existing today are either formal, ad hoc, de facto, or open standards. We'll see examples of them and how FRAND is related to each of those. Now, what are standard setting organizations? These are entities which are primarily engaged in deciding what is going to be the standard. Okay? Otherwise, we'll, for a certain field, we are going to have too many standards. And everybody would like to weigh. It's like a father and a son situation. When the father tells you, the son, you shouldn't be doing all this and you should be doing all this. We listen to some and we come up with our own notions. And so there should be a standard that where the both can talk. Otherwise, we all want our processes, our products, our methods to move, others to follow. Now, this is typically done by standard setting organization. The processes of setting standards are voluntary, consensus driven, and characterized by transparency and openness. The last point which I am saying, transparency and openness, is one area which has been mostly discussed, debated. People find a lot of lack of openness and transparency both. The increasing complexity in standardization has triggered into a lot of IP issues, particularly in patents, including e-governance systems. This has resulted each of those SSOs to come up with their own IP policies. Minimizing risk of conflict requires to adopt policies which are balanced, and most of these SSOs have come up with such policies. Obligation for participation in the standard setting process is for to decide on essential patents and pending applications. What I mean by that is that, if you have a standard and you propose a standard, you have patents and you want to make those patents standard essential patents because they govern the way the standards function, this, and including the pending applications, should be discussed at length before adoption. Obligation to agree, and there is a cumulative royalty issue. As somebody pointed out in the morning, there's nothing free. If you want to buy a standard, if you want to use a standard, or adopt to a standard, or license, you have to pay. Now, FRAND talks about whether that payment is fair enough. Now, Sapna did mention a few steps. Now, this is how a standard setting process usually works. Okay, there are 8 stages, which I'm not reading out all of them. Starts with research, and this is how finally a standard gets established. And what I've tried to do in the remaining space of the slide, put down some of the standard setting organizations which are popular, available for different telecom related issues globally. Like you have TSDSI, which is an Indian body for standards in this. Now let's look at patterns and standards. Okay, there are commonalities, there are conflicts. If you look at the philosophy is, our patent is that I don't want anybody else. It's a defensive right. I don't want anybody else to practice what I have. Standard comes from just the opposite thing. If I have a standard which is a patent, I am obligated to license it. I cannot say no, because I have taken the means, the pressures to make it part of a standard, so I am obligated to license. There is, under agreed conditions, of course. But that's not from where the philosophy for which the patent started. Patents started with just an opposite philosophy. Of course, both encourage investment, allows technology developers to disclose. Of course, there is a risk of secrecy. If you don't disclose and you want to keep it a trade secret, it may not be a good idea sometimes because there is no protection, both in the case of standards and patents. It enables technical specifications. Standards will often include patented technology. And there are many cases where standards require patented technologies, and that's where the fun is. Similar to standards like patents, you have a similarity with copyright. Okay, copyright, especially what is noticed now in the DRM area, that's the digital rights management area, that's what every organization uses to protect or give access to different layers of data. Now, imagine a situation where you have a set of data in your organization and you have a set of system which controls the access and security of that. And I have a different system in my organization. And when we need to talk or share, it's going to be extremely difficult. Okay? So that was addressed, okay, where we can share some of those digital right management processes by adopting standardized procedures. This is important because this also allows you your desired level of security which you want. Fortunately, this part has been addressed in depth by copyright also. Okay. Now, what are SEPs? SEPs are standard essential patents. These are patents that claim an invention that is used to comply with a technical standard. Now, this is, we saw the process, how standards get established. At stage 5, a list of patents and pending applications are discussed, and they are finally thought as or agreed upon as the standard patents. And they are given special treatment during licensing. It is believed that when you are licensing a standard essential patent, you need to be fair, you need to be reasonable, and you need to be non-discriminatory. That's what FRAND is. See, there are 3 types of licenses which work. Okay, it is to be RAND, which means where the fairness is not there, reasonable and non-discriminatory. FRAND, which is fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory. There is another type which is called RF. Not very common, that is royalty free. This royalty free is also known as RAND-Z. That is RAND with 0 license fee. Now, if you look at the standard association patent holders, can you imagine 21,500 standard essential patents held by a single company? Now, if that numbers are so high, and if I am an organization which has that much of patents which control standard which have been established at SEPs, I am definitely going to use it for my benefit. I also would like to take it to a place where to drive the technology. Okay. See, in India, SEP and FRAND, the noise is made primarily by Ericsson. You see, Ericsson is not really on the top. It is a 6th. And not only the 6th, it has 1/5 the total number of patents which Qualcomm has. Regarding SEPs only. Another point there is, now if you look at, these are all individual patents. Now they all belong to a family. So if you bring down to the number of inventions, that is number of patent families which have multiple patents in different jurisdictions, then also the number is very high. Qualcomm is very close to 5,000 patent families, giving more than 21,000 individual patents which are accepted as SEPs. Now, once these companies have used the standard setting organization, have done this, the rest of the world have to handle it, tackle it, and live with it. And to do that, the proposition is to have a friend, where it has to be fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. What do you mean? See, when we say friend, F, often by, slip of tongue, or often, I also believe it shouldn't be, F should not stand for fair, it should stand for free. If it's free, then everybody can adopt the friend. Then what is the purpose of having so much of patent and spending so much of investment in it? So what do you mean by fair? That it basically means not anti-competitive. Okay? It's not that I am giving standard license of SEPs to 3 different companies with different conditions and creating a competitive environment in the market. Or, this often results in bundling, grant-backs, and non-exclusivities. When I talk about reasonable, these are the licensing rates. Just because you are adopting my standard, just because your mobile phone requires a license of my standard, I can't charge 50% of your profit. It has to be reasonable. Although I know without that standard, you are not there in the market at all. It should be a reasonable part. Non-discriminatory is again, treating all licenses similar. I can't say that if the phones which cost below 1,000 rupees will pay. This was actually the Ericsson case. Ericsson initially said that phones below 100 rupees should be paying 1 rupee 25 paisa as royalty per sale. Those above 100 will be paying 12 rupees 50 paisa per phone. Now, it's the same technology, same adoption. Why? For an expensive phone, I'm paying more. Okay? So those have been debated. Some of the results have come out. Now the question I have, which I want to ask to all of you, when you are licensing a standard essential patent, you need to be fair, you need to be reasonable, and you need to be non-discriminatory. When you are licensing any other patent, a non-SEP, does that mean that when you are licensing a non-SEP, you don't need to be fair? You don't need to be reasonable? You can be discriminatory? Why do we have it only for SEPs? Why not for any patent licensing? So this obviously gives a belief that when you're licensing any other patents which is not an SEP, you can be unfair, you need not be reasonable, and you can be discriminatory. In reality it happens. And it's not that important because the technology to run, to function, to live, to breathe is not dependent on that patents alone. Here you cannot function if you don't have those license of SEPs. It's a cartel. That's how it works. So there are a few practices which should be understood when you're talking about FRAND. One is hold up, reverse hold up, and royalty stacking. What I say by hold up is, it is an action coming up from the licensee, the SEP holder. It's a potential problem when the SEP holder makes a commitment to license and then delays it. See, I agree to give you a license under FRAND terms because you have contacted me, but at the same time I sue you for patent infringement and get an injunction. There have been cases of such quite a lot of those ex parte injunctions happening. That's not fair. I am delaying it, you have come for a license, I'm delaying it, and at the same time I do. Then what happens, since you are already in the court and there is an injunction, your arm is already reasonably twisted, and I can dictate the terms of the license to you. Which has happened. Some of them were successful, some were not. Reverse hold-up is just the opposite. Okay, I am delaying in taking the license. No, I am not saying I won't take, I am delaying. The other part is royalty stacking. Now, when you look at a technology or a product, such as a chip, we were talking about CDNA and GSM technologies, it is not a single patent which works. It's not a single, the technology is covered by multiple patents. So the royalty is not for a single patent. It's for a list of patents. If you go to the Standard Setting Organization's website for different technologies, look at the SEPs. It's a list. And some of those lists are from multiple organizations holding the patents. So you actually can't just license a single SEP and go around. So there is a reasonable amount of royalty stacking which happens in almost all the cases. Now let's look at the approach, the topic of, as written in the program, which has been taken by some of the countries. I've taken a few countries which are, if you look at the US approach, without getting into the different case laws, what is the finding where we stand? If you look at that, then there is a commitment to the Standard Setting Organization. See, the responsibility is largely on the SSO to license on FRAND terms, which constitutes a binding contract between the SEP holder, the SSO, and the members. The members are none but the SEP holders. The potential users of standards are third-party beneficiaries of agreements which are standing to sue. Just because they license doesn't mean that they cannot counter-sue them. Seeking injunctive relief on a FRAND encumbered SEP may violate the duty of good faith. You cannot sue if somebody is asking for a FRAND license. FRAND license includes an obligation to negotiate in good faith, and an obligation is a two-way street. Now, these are very beautiful words. Well written, well spoken, बोलने के लिए अच्छा लगता है, सुनने के लिए अच्छा लगता है. But what do you mean by, to negotiate in good faith? How do you define that? And then when money is involved, not some small money, big money. So that's where the chance comes. That's why in US they also came out with a definition of what is a reasonable rate. Okay? A reasonable royalty rate. Even other countries have also come out. India has also, Delhi High Court has come out with a definition of that. The reasonable royalty rate limits a patent holder to be responsible. Okay, again, vague term, on the economic value of the patented technology, apart from the value of the associated incorporation of the technology used in the standard. It is not the value of the phone. It is value of that part of technology which you have licensed, which makes that phone functional. But beside that, there are many other things on the phone. Considers the importance of SEPs to the standard and the importance of standards to the product at issue. Considers only comparable patents as benchmarks. So in this case, we are looking at only SEPs, not any other patents. There could be other patents also by the same applicant which you are infringing, but they may not be SEPs. That is not part of this FRAND. Takes into consideration the evidence of royalty stacking by combining an aggregate of royalties. That's what I said, it's not a single patent, it's always a bunch of patents. If you look at the EU approach, they have a divided approach. Divided approach means there have been two contradicting statements which has come. One from the European Commission, the other from the Fair Trading Commission of EU. Okay. Anyway, both these bodies are not very healthy right now because of, Brexit and other breakup in EU. The Fair Trade Commission sets up a process that must be followed prior to seeking or enforcing an injunctive relief. There's a process which means that you must approach each other, talk to each other, and that is mandatory before you go for an injunctive relief. There is no such, mandatory action recommended by the European Commission. The European Commission puts a burden on the implementer to show that it's a willing license, whereas the Fair Trading Commission, FTC, is just the opposite. Initial burden to prove that the license is not willing. I just picked out which are the opposites. It's preclude injunctions only in the European Union and only for patents granted in the European Union. The FTC says covers patents and pending applications also, not only granted applications. Globally and not limited to patents only in EU, they refer to the entire bunch of patents globally. Applies to both current and future injunction. FTC says you do not require to withdraw pending injunctions. Arbitration is only when both parties agree. Arbitration, both parties need not agree also, can seek it. Now, the European Commission results actually came from enforcement of standards for Samsung when they evaluated that. And the FTC came from, the Motorola Google case. It's important to know what China talks about it. China, the Supreme Court has said that they've been very reasonable in that. They say that when a patentee engages in a standard setting or agrees the patent to be in a local standard, the patentee is deemed to have permitted others to exploit the patent. That means you are automatically giving right for somebody else to exploit under certain terms. And exploitation of such patent in China will not be considered as infringement at all. Essential patents must be licensed at an amount sufficiently lower than the normal license fee. That's the guidance they have from the People's Code. But the Standard Administration of China and the Patent Office has also added their bit to this, which is the disclosure of essential patents owned or known. The patents included in the national standard must be licensed on FRAND terms, which everybody talks about. For the mandatory national standards to license on FRAND terms, the Patent Office and the standard body must negotiate with the patent holder regarding a method for the patent holder to divest the relevant patents. So that's something strange. If both the parties do not agree, that means as a standard patent holder, essential patent holder, I do not agree with the party who is trying to take license. Those patents can get divested. Okay. We do not have an example like that, but this is what is the guidelines. It's interesting to know Korea also, because there are many players in the telecom area which comes from Korea. KFTC is Korea Free Trade Commission. There was only one important, or rather one case for which there were some conclusions drawn in Korea. It was Apple versus Samsung. The good part is that, this commission came out with the rights and wrong for both parties. On one hand, when they said that the patent filed, Apple filed patent infringement litigation against Samsung without negotiation. So that means there were no FRAND negotiation, you just filed an infringement. That was not found correct. The proposed license terms was devalued Samsung's patent values, engaged in reverse hold-up. They were delaying. Whereas for Samsung, the outcome was before and after filing the injunction claims. Samsung proposed various license terms to Apple and proceeded with substantial negotiations, but nothing was agreed. The royalty terms proposed by Samsung were not excessive. So it is now, as we stand in Korea, a mix of both sides, both those columns. That's how future is going to take place. Now let's look at India. India, there are findings of the Competition Commission, and there are interim orders from the Delhi High Court. If you look at what the Competition Commission is saying, not that the Delhi High Court agreed to all that was said by the CCI, but they came out with certain findings which are very, very pertinent, important, and makes a lot of sense in a country like India. Forcing a party to execute an NDA is unfair, because once you have an NDA, you can, which happened in the Ericsson case, you can have an unfair royalty discussion. Transparency is the hallmark of fairness, so NDA is contrary to that. They expressed concern about the hold-up and royalty stacking, charging two different fees per unit. That's what I said, 1.25 and 12.5 for phones below 100 rupees and all. That was what Ericsson had proposed. With the same technology, just because it's like that, you buy a fan. You buy a fan and you put it in a small 10 by 10 room, or you put it in a big bungalow. It's the fan. Just because you put it in a more expensive house, the cost of the fan should not go up. No? That was the kind of analogy that was used. Whereas there have been several interim orders, the Delhi High Court had granted an ex parte injunction. They ordered the CCI to not to give a final order and not to interfere. They alleged that there was infringement of the 2G and 3G standards and used the net sale method. Okay, the net sale method is something, what is the final price of your product, and came with a much lower pricing, which is around 80 paisa to 85 paisa per phone as the pricing. Now these are the 8 patents, 8 granted patents, all belonging to Ericsson, which have led to this standard litigations of in and around FRAND. What you see in the left-hand side here, I don't know, okay, that side, these are the litigations which are resulted because of the 8 patents, and you find that in one side it's all Ericsson, Ericsson, Ericsson. So it started with Micromax, had Gioni, had Intex, Xiaomi, Kingtech, Eyeball, and Lava. And Ericsson did not even stop suing Competition Commission of India, saying that of unfair dealing. Besides these 8, there are 2 more such litigation filed by Verenigo against ZTE and Asus. There is one more case by Qualcomm. That's how the litigation in FRAND in India today stands. So for Indian company in the telecom, which is the primary area of focus right now, because we are not, as a country in India, we are not really looking for other sectors right now. There's not that much of demand now as all litigation. So what we have, since telecom is increasing for the last 2 years, both CCI and the Delhi High Court are tussling over the nation's jurisprudence of FRAND. Both bodies have passed several orders. The contention issue is a method how essential patent royalty is to be collected. From a policy perspective, there have been suggestions that instead of the net sale method, one can adopt component method, which I was just talking about, giving the fan analogy. Now, India we are looking for a balanced approach, and what can that be? It's a commitment that, okay, FRAND license should be there whenever SAPs are required. An SAP holder makes a commitment to give a FRAND license unless, there are some exceptions, like, there's a financial distress or the potential licensee assets are located in a different jurisdiction and is unwilling to enter into a FRAND license. And it should be fairly negotiated, and, must be made, efforts must be made on the basis of all objective facts and to get into a situation. Because, as an implementer, I need those patents to stay alive. As an SAP holder, I want to license them. But that's why, I want the technology to be controlled largely by me. So the reasonable royalty commitments which can be taken into account is based on, the component parts. Holders of FRAND SAP may require to be prospective license to license the patents which are non-SAPs also, because finally if you're infringing other patents which are not covered by SAPs but other normal single patents, you can look for a package for licensing all of them, and both parties may agree to negotiate a package of license with mandating all, because it's good for all and it makes it easier. Negotiation, valuation, these are not easy processes. It takes time and it requires skills and efforts. So that's how the France situation today stands here. And later on, if you have any question, I'll be willing to take it. Thank you very much.
Scenario that is there in the standard essential patents globally, and it's very essential how do we actually come out with the right definition of FRAND. Now we have Professor Vivekanand who will be talking about patent pools and antitrust emerging legal issues.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all of you. I'll have to start quick and finish it because I risk the chair leaving the session. He has got a flight to catch. Then both of us will be, what you call it, hanging around here without the chair to moderate. So let me straight away start. From morning, you have been discussing in the beginning about the state of the art in terms of arguments on computer-related inventions in the first session. Second session, we did talk about the complexity of how this whole development of computers, computer programs, and then the standards, interoperability, as you said that, as my colleague Matilal was also speaking, that software, they said the famous story where Bill Gates, walks into IBM office in somewhere in 1976-77 and asks for a contract to supply his software. And IBM, it's IBM, it's not a person, it's a they thought some young fellow sitting there asking for a contract to try his, OS. They said, encourage a small fellow. He gave a contract. When the contract is written that all IBM will outsource everything, the OS from Bill Gates, but Bill Gates will be free to sell it to anywhere. Then IBM thought it's a very funny class because they thought except IBM there is no computer company. Where is he going to sell? They said for fun, they said we'll sign it. The rest was history. IBM could not get out, but he was selling everywhere. So that is the complexity of software to tell you. Suddenly Bill Gates becomes the richest person. As Bill Gates, even though there is Microsoft. But IBM is just a company traditionally. So given all this, the afternoon session they had, and then Professor Sarkar talked about now the more complexity, what you call transactional developments happening in terms of how to run patents and its market. As the last part, I thought I will discuss with you on what you call as patent pooling. So, and also antitrust. There are two issues here. So how do I really look at it? The balance between patents as well as competition. The way we call it as competition, the American word is what you call as antitrust. So if I really look at it, what is patent pooling? Right? This explains to you what is patent pooling. So in simple, the patent pooling really starts way back in 1856 to 1877. What are the issue at the time? You all know this very, very, iconic Singer machine, which is a sewing machine. At that time, there were many sewing machine firms came, and some of them held patents, and each one was suing each other, right, at that point. And they were suing so much, and finally, one of the attorney, his name was Orlando Porter, he interfered and said, see, everybody wants sewing machines. You are all manufacturing sewing machines. Why are you suing each other instead of suing each other? So they said, come together. A $15 from each machine sold will be put in a pool, and then it will be shared by everyone. So the first patent pool came way back 1856. Then we go to the next one. You must be recognizing these two characters. They are popularly known as Wright brothers. They put their glider in 1902 and went to patent it in 1906, often called as fathers of aviation. Now, slowly Wright brothers, if you don't know about patent history, became Wrong brothers. In the sense, they started suing every other aviator, and they became so infamous in US, it was joked, if anyone jumps from any plane and waves, they'll be sued for a patent infringement, right? So that was the case. Then another aviator called Custis Company and Wright brothers blocked all new airplanes which were being manufactured, and it became a problem. United States government suffered without aircrafts during World War I. So even the government was caught into the whole litigation spree of patents. So the US government then put a committee headed by none other than President Franklin Roosevelt, who brokered a peace. So it looks like capitalism at its height, right? He brokered a peace for a patent pool. So Franklin Roosevelt is the one who brokered a patent pool. It was called as the Manufacturers Aircraft Association to get a blanket fee for each plane manufactured in US to the two companies. That is Wright brothers, and the other one is called the Aviator Custis Company. And then the brothers became happy. So suddenly you had, you see what I call the big power of patents. And then suddenly patents could block many things, including government can come to the knee. But anyway, in the United States, they don't want to really touch patent system. They try to work around it to make compromises, rather than they felt maybe not to throw the baby out of the bathwater. So this is 1908 and 1918. Then a bit of a lull in patent pooling system, and then traditional patents war was happening. But we can jumpstart to much recent times. This is where we are getting into the era of internet, era of computers, softwares, everything. This is called the Moving Pictures Expert Group. You all know as MPEG. When you are downloading files, MPEG. So what is MPEG? It proposed a consortium called MPEG LA, an agent to license essential patents in a single package. 9 different entities owning essential patents became part of the agent, forming the modern day patent pool. Because almost it was 60, 70, some attempts of patent pool, nothing was now. And suddenly it was the need of the day that they all came together and they said they will do a patent pool. But this time, unlike Roosevelt, who was caught napping, this time the Department of Justice in US was reviewing all these things. They know that this could turn out to be something different. So they responded favorably, but they gave a business review letter, how you should run it. They gave it to MPEG-LA. This was one of the developments. I will tell later, even MPEG-LA was played a foul play much later on this. A lot of critics were there. Then comes 1997 to 2014, where the antitrust division responded to the patent pool proposal of the players called, all of you know the word DVD, right? And today's world is so difficult, so many acronyms we have, and if I ask you to expand all the acronyms in each of their specialized field, it is going to be what you call as, maybe you need a postgraduate diploma in, acronyms, right? So DVD is nothing but, DVD is what? Digital Versatile Disk, right? Even I am reading it again here because I keep forgetting. Digital Versatile Disk. This is the latest. And this is also a pooling system, a patent pooling system, by bringing in, see, you have patents, bringing the patents together, pool it together, and then you can call it a kind of a cooperative model in one sense. Try to bring in and then see that, what you call as, you stop unwanted patent litigation with each other, and probably you can have a win-win situation among the patent holders. But the problem is, it could be a win-win situation between the patent holders, but is it a win-win situation to the consumer? That is always the biggest problem. Because morning also when you talk standard setting organization, it is standardization is good for those in the standardization. But what is happening inside the standardization or coalition is good, even in politics. But what is people going to get out of the coalition is the biggest question. See, if you see coalition, they're so fast, right? Within a couple of hours, one party lost the government in Goa, another party got the government, right? So they can work so fast. But the question comes always the other side. That's where I said the antitrust or competition law, how does it view patent pool? Before that, one or few slides more, just to tell you, you must have heard about RFID, Radio Frequency Identification Domain. If you want to experiment this, you can go to a library and steal a book We all have put RFID there. Right? So this is RFID technology which comes in, and this is again a consortium which was picked by a licensee for operating a patent pool in 2006. These are all the things in electronics and computer science not to be left behind. Pharma and biotech is one of the important areas of patent pool, because they thought, why not we use this method here? So the first patent pool is Unit 8, established in 2006 by Brazil, Chile, France, Norway and United Kingdom. It's called the International Drug Purchasing Facility, and it's backed by a North-South membership, and this is being supported by non-governmental organization and communities relating to drugs relating to HIV, malaria and tuberculosis. This is the first medicines patent pool, moving away from other areas to this thing. So now, if I look little further on all these developments, let us get into the content of what is what. The general definition refers to the joint licensing of two or more entities owning essential patents required for a practice or defined specification, which often stated as standard or can be open standard or de facto standard, as Dr. Sarkar was pointing out. This all put together becomes the word patent pool. The why of the patent pool. What is the why of the patent pool? Basically, it is for a larger market access. Naturally, it is not for some socialist or communist cause. It is for a larger market access, to reduce the cost of independent licensing, to create a win-win situation of the licensor and the licensees, to create a market stability and avoiding unwarranted litigation cost, and also to balance return on investment and reasonable access price. This is the main area which you are really moving in. Then it can take around normally 9 to 15 months for publication of standard setting, which the earlier session was really talking about the characteristics. Additional time of around 3 years for its development, because he was telling about many process which happens. Requires global players to come to terms with the nitty-gritty of the license provisions. It requires to make the program market enabling in spite of the release of the products in the market. So this is how the process happens. Now, if I look at the pro-competitive aspects of patent pooling, integrating complementary technology, reducing transaction cost, clearing blocking positions, avoiding costly litigation, promoting the dissemination of technology to a larger audience. This seems to be the, if I look at, is competition good? Competition is good even if you are doing patent pool, if you look at this perspective. But if you look at the other perspective, anti-competitive thing, collective price restraints. In the bargain, they talk about keeping the price at a particular thing. In a non-pooling situation, each one hits each other, price comes down. Here there could be, look, let us stop with this. Collective output restraints. Sometimes I create a scarcity, but by stopping something. Exclusion, rule of reason they call. We will keep this inside and this outside. Arrangements discouraging R&D rule. Means, it's good. Why should I unnecessarily do R&D, come with new? When I got a market, when I got something stable going on, to get my point. R&D is what you call us, is a need because you are losing out and then you want to come out something. When you are assured, if I assure my student, the day he joins he will get distinction, why unnecessarily study the whole semester? It's a waste of time, right? That is rational. That is the logic. So these could be the things which you have to bear in mind. As far as pools are concerned, please remember, I'm not using the word patent pools. It is meant as patent pool. Don't imagine some 5-star hotel pool, right? Mega pools, right? It really talks about, bigger size and bringing in few things. Contract patent pools and technical standards based pools. What are these three? If I really look very quickly, the mega pool is portfolio of patent free of infringement claims, well-defined administrative mechanism, royalty fixed based on licensing terms, valuation of the patents by independent body, provision to add new patents to existing pool, binding for members to offer non-exclusive licenses. He was explaining about FAND and what exactly it means to be fair and reasonable, etc. All these are also essential element in the concept what we are talking as mega pools, which means it has no limit. It can really operate in a bigger way. The other one is called the contract pool, which means one-stop licenses, target based on specific sectors of technology, need to have well-defined administrative mechanism. On the other side, if you look at technical standard pools, innovations resulting in patents, striving to standardize patent technology, standardization becomes the essential part, and licensing through the pool. So these are all some of the aspects. Now, what is the downside which with the MPEG-LA when it came, and much later, in 96, 97, MPEG-LA came, and after down the line 7, 8 years, 9 years, a lot of people understood that a lot of things are happening. Now, this is not only now, it was from the Singer days, once pools were encouraged as stopping litigation, but resulted in a different area of downfall. The downside of the pools is dumping non-essential patents, price fixing, unreasonable royalty charge, and grand back became the thing. The sewing machine pool turned to be extortion at a point, right? And MPEG-LA is criticized for charging unreasonably high licensing fees to access pools that contain mostly expired patents. A pool called OneBlue, which administers licensing for patents essential to, if you know, the Blu-ray disc products today which we use in, watching movies, you find it's also demanding same royalties for its technology in Blu-ray disc players, even though the product prices have plummeted. One Blu-ray's royalty has remained same at $9 per player despite a nearly 75% decrease in retail pricing over the past decade. So price is down one side, but the licensee has to pay the same thing throughout. These are all the downside. Now, if I look at a couple of more points on, anti-dumping, on anti-competitive practice, let me skip some, and then I come here to tell you the second part of the story. For many of you, if you're law people, you fairly have a good understanding of what is competition. But if you're a technical people, you need to understand what is anti-competitive. In a definition of antitrust, as is said in the US, and competition in India is like this. The full range of government policies that influence competition in domestic markets. This could include policies relating to tariffs, industry subsidies, operation of government-owned businesses, the regulation of natural monopolies, behavior or privately owned business, infrastructure development, regional development, all of them as potentially will come under the lens of competition policy or antitrust policy as in America. Not essentially single one, it could be multiple single on certain context. This is the narrow definition is simple. To eliminate or to minimize restrictive business practices that hinder or prevent business from competing freely in a domestic market. Examples might include collusive tendering, resale price maintenance, abuse of dominant position. The classic example of antitrust was Microsoft. They were sued in 50 states in United States. All the 50 states sued, the Department of Justice took action because of using their dominant position. When they wanted all the people who are using their operating system, they said, when internet was coming in, they said, you have to essentially take Explorer as your browser. They will give it free, that's different. We will give it free, but it should be this browser. It should be the browser. Because at that point, Netscape was the big leader in browsing. So how to cut? So they felt the best way is that you need this, you put this. And the companies did not have much of a choice. They have to follow that. And that was later investigated. Somehow they managed to keep the case down in US. But in Europe, they were fined very, very heavily because simply Microsoft was the dominant player. And people don't have a choice to go somewhere else and they have to accept what they said. This is one example to tell you about how do you use this. Now, having said this, how does patent pool things come here? As I said, the second level objective of competition policy is what conduct is unlawful to provide an effective mechanism for investigating potential contraventions and examining applications for exemptions. Also to provide a free, fair and competent process for determining contraventions and applications for exemptions. Also redress adversely affected by unlawful anti-competitive conduct. So this is how the UNCTAD model law on competition talks about how you have to do. In India, we have this Competition Commission of India, which one of the slide he was telling about CCI and even how courts were sometimes also what you call as having their views on CCI. So, you really look at these as the second level objectives. The antitrust dilemma, if I do, patent pools pose a unique challenge to antitrust enforcement. On the one hand, they solve collective action problems, allow participants to achieve economies of scale that would otherwise be impossible. There's no point in putting so much of R&D, bringing out something when you really cannot reach this kind of scale what you want. Whereas patent pools also enable market participants to join complementary IP to better manage these IP rights. Right? So, in intellectual property, if you really look at the philosophy, it's a physical property. If it goes into some litigation and you get the property after 20 years back, you are very sure the property price would have gone 3 times. But intellectual property, if you wait for 20 years to get a result on a patent, it's a total waste because the patent thing is just in the beginning. Few years after that innovation exceeds. So it's better to manage IP portfolio. Litigation seems to be the last choice, generally speaking. So the flip side, as I said, a pool may interfere with relationships, convergent intellectual property rights, and results in particularly pernicious if one of the patent participants seek to introduce new business model. So having said this, the issue what I want to tell that, how do we really resolve these two things? If I conclude in the next couple of slides, what I call is is it good to have patent pools, encourage them, or what to do? So the balance, as I say, the lesson cannot be that patent pools are inherently bad. Pooling complementary product displaces litigation in favor of innovation and is absolutely a win-win for consumers as well as manufacturers. But on the same side, it also to be continued oversight is necessary in case of patent pools, especially when there is so much incentive for a pool to step outside the confines and to begin leveraging its unique market. So this requires, we are in a very nascent stage, let it be IP, let it be Competition Commission. But there are a lot of good lessons or tough lessons to be learned in other jurisdictions, especially if I use the word antitrust, because the United States is a very clear example of how things have moved fast and then how it has also been checkmated. So, if my parting thoughts, as I said, the pool is more likely to be welfare enhancing if they are complementary. It is never affected by possibility of independent licensing. It results to generalize the patents stay in importance. When pool members are also downstream users, additional concerns emerge, that is pool members may be reluctant to create competitors. So this is the, what you call, as I would conclude what I say. As I said, the choice is, between always I say, a street fight or a boxing ring. Right? In both the places there are punches. But nevertheless, this looks like more regulated. So patent pools, in my opinion, could, if properly managed, which means the referee is the person who is Competition Commission, because without referee here also it will become a street fight, right? So there has to be referee, there has to be certain transparency, there has to be certain things they could be done. So, conclusion, happy pooling. Thank you.
Patents. So, is policing possible? Is it necessary by standard setting organizations, like which patents are essential and which patents are not?
See, when an SEP is identified, there's a lot of process stages which go on, okay? And there is now, and utmost care is taken that that it is really required to be included as a SEP. Now, once it has been identified in SEP, there's no further monitoring required, okay? Now, a product is not covered by SEP alone, it's covered by other patents also. Now, the non-SEP patents will follow the route of regular infringement. Okay?
Hello? Yeah, if you take ETSI policy, it states that monitor which patents are essential, patents are not. It is the company who by itself declares that it is
You're absolutely right, the company declares, but it's not the declaration and SSO accepts it. There is a process, there is a group, there is a committee who evaluates that. That's it. The burden is, SSO is not carrying any burden of further monitoring. However, there is a provision of adding patents to that as SEP to that technology anytime in the future also.
So who will have the last say now? Oh.
So what about the patents that expire in SEP? How do they cover? How do the companies cover?
Patents which expire in
Yeah, patents expiring. So let's say after 20 years the patent expires, right? So is it applicable for SEP as well?
Absolutely, and there is no separate treatment.
Okay.
So they will be deemed to have been donated to public, like any other patent.
Anyone last? One more.
Okay, take two, short. Actually, they're asking short questions.
I just saw some news article saying that the patent trading firms which procures licenses the patents of complementary or kind of things and do the business. How does it is different
See,
from
this is
standard?
nothing like patent trading firms. This popularly in natural language we call them trolls. Okay, there's nothing bad about it, but people try to sometimes be more generous and not using trolls. They say they are patents held by non-practicing entities.
And now, the bad part starts when instead of they being used for practicing patents, they are used for litigating others who are practicing technology. They are the downside.
Yes.
Am I Anil?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
See, if I am a patent holder, whether I practice or not, is my prerogative. You can't practice it. If you practice it, I'm going to sue you. This is a business model which has been established. Intellectual Ventures was one of the biggest companies who started it. There are many companies in the field.
Is it a parallel line to the patent standard setting because this
No.
Nothing to do.
Nothing. It's no relationship.
Last question.
Yeah, it's a general question with respect to patents and copyrights. Let us suppose if I purchased a Windows operating system from Microsoft, Windows operating system from Microsoft, I paid some X amount. So I used it and due to 0-day vulnerabilities, my system was hacked by some X. So can I claim damages as per the Indian context?
Your system was hacked by?
Some hacker, because that is a 0-day vulnerability is there. So there is the software has some vulnerability, there is no fix available, so they exploited that vulnerability.
So you're talking about product liability.
Yeah, so
You're talking about product liability. Am I right?
yeah, because I am paying for the patent product, I am using it, I was incurred loss due to that.
Okay,
So is the patent holder is liable for paying damages to me?
My point is simple. One, when you say hacking, it's too broad a word we are telling hacking. It means, I enter your computer, remove something, damage something. That's one part. What you are talking is about the software itself is open, is, having glitches, etc. And what you call as, there is a reasonable kind of rights that they do bring in whenever there are vulnerabilities, patches, etc. They keep taking efforts on that, what they are doing. But you are going to sue because somebody hacked. Do you get my point?
The shrink wrap license, actually, if you read through the license terms, adequately mitigates the risk of the seller.
They indemnify everything.
They indemnify everything.
They indemnify everything. Means, that's what I said. You are using the example of Microsoft. So why that's vulnerable because a lot of people love Microsoft to be hacked. That's another point. The point I am trying to tell, they also putting, that's also big company putting things. But if you are talking somebody is cheating you, even with the shrink wrap, that what they give, they don't even have standards, then possibility you can reopen and tell. Because even shrink wrap is questioned because that's a type of a contract which is a very new type of contract where there is no meeting of minds, there is nothing. Right? When you open the shrink wrap, you are simply accepting. But there is, if it is unreasonable product, and then what is shrink wrapped and given you can even go try in a court on that. But when, that is why big companies coming out with patches, they keep regularly updating you what is happening, all that stuff. So in such case, there could be something which is there beyond their control or whatever. So I don't think so this liability thing is going to be taken seriously.
So let me thank Professor Vivekanandan and Dr. Sarkar for their very knowledgeable talks on the subject, and because Sarkar already got the memento and he is not entitled for it, it's his own home ground.
Do you think that is unfair?
But reasonable.
This is reasonable? This is pure case of discrimination.
If you have collected a certificate, it's fine. If some of you are not taken, there will be somebody left, you can send it across later. And I was told by the IT team here that they'll be uploading this in YouTube. There is something called Nalsar University YouTube channel, which already has some 100+ lectures of different topics. They're going to upload this, they were telling, and let's hope to do that.